بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم على عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. Respected brothers and sisters, last week we were speaking about the Battle of Uhud, and we had reached the point in the battle, the expedition of Uhud, where the Sahaba radiallahu anhum had abandoned their positions that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had appointed them at. The archers moved from the mount, and it allowed the Quraysh, under the command and leadership of Khalid bin Walid, who was not a Muslim at the time, radiallahu anhu, to ambush the believers by coming from behind the mountain. And what happened as a result was there was an upheaval and havoc amongst the believers. Some of them fled from the battlefield, and a rumor had spread that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been martyred. Some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum stood their ground, and there were approximately 14 names that we mentioned last week. Amongst them, there were 7 from the Muhajirin, the migrants, and 7 from the Ansar, the helpers, who stayed around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and defended him. One of the individuals that was not mentioned last week, and I was reminded about her, and yes, she was a woman, a Sahabiya, was Nusayba bint Ka'ab radiyallahu anha. Nusayba radiyallahu anha was one of the women from the Ansar. She had embraced Islam during the Bay'ah. Nusayba radiyallahu anha was from Banu Najjar, the tribe of Khazraj, and during the Bay'atul Aqaba, when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, during his Meccan life, at the latter stage of his Meccan life, or in the latter stages, when the early Medinans came to Mecca during the Hajj season and they embraced Islam, during that Bay'ah, Nusayba bint Ka'ab radiyallahu anha was present. Her, alongside her husband, the famous companion Zayd bin Asim radiyallahu anhu, and 2 of her sons, Habib and Abdullah. Habib was very, very young at that time, and also her sister. They were present at the Bay'ah al-Aqaba. So this Nusaybah radiyallahu anha was a fierce woman. She was a lioness, she was brave, and she was a hero. And during the Battle of Uhud, some of the women from the believers had joined the campaign to become nurses and to provide assistance to the warriors and the fighters during the battle. So during the earlier phases of the battle, when the Muslims were victorious, when they were in the ascendancy, she was aiding the believers, the warriors, by nursing the wounds of the soldiers who had been wounded and by providing water to the soldiers. But when the tides had turned and the Muslims were suffering defeat, she then took out her sword, she unsheathed her sword, and she had a bow in one hand, and she went into the thick of the battle. Nusayba bint Ka'ab radiyallahu anha. Now, she's from a very noble family, and her family was deeply rooted in Islam, because when she became a Muslim in Bay'atul Aqaba, her husband, her 2 sons became Muslim at the same time. And her son Habib is the same companion radiyallahu anhu who was sent to Musaylama Kadhab, Musaylama the liar, to the Banu Hanifa tribe, to embrace Islam, to accept Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Musaylama posed a threat. He abandoned Islam. First they had accepted Islam, And then he went back to his tribe and he said to his tribe that I'm more worthy of prophethood and leadership. So they became apostates. And when Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam sent Habib bin Zayd radiallahu anhu with a letter to Musaylama, Musaylama had him chained. And we're going to discuss this later on when we come later anyway. But Habib bin Zayd radiallahu anhu was brutally killed by Musaylama. One limb after another was severed from his body. So when this news had reached Nusayba radiallahu anha, she vowed that she will take revenge against Musaylama. And during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when the battle of Yamama took place, Nusayba radiallahu anha went into the battle. But as she reached Musaylama, he was already killed by who? Who killed Musaylama? Wahshi radiallahu anhu. Remember we discussed this last week. Wahshi, the one who murdered Hamza radiallahu anhu. But he became a believer. So Wahshi was the one who had killed Musaylama. But when she saw Musaylama dead, she said, now my son's life has been avenged. And even in that battle, Yamama, she suffered 11 wounds to her body and she lost her hand in the battle of Yamama. Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma used to have great respect for her. It was mentioned that once cloth came to Medina, cloth, and Umar radiallahu anhu was being encouraged to give the cloth to his daughter and to his daughter-in-law. He said, no, there's a woman who's more worthy than them. And he sent the clothing to Nusayba radiallahu anha. So what happens? One of her sons was Abdullah bin Zayd. He's a very famous companion who described the wudu of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made his wudu. It's mentioned that when she joined the battle, whenever danger approached Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she would rush to protect him. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam noticed this, and he said, whenever I would turn right, I would see Nusayba. Whenever I would turn left, I would see Nusayba. I saw her fighting for me. One of her sons' name was Ammara. He described what happened on that day. Ammara says, that's why her name was Ammara. Nusayba Ammara bint Ka'b radiallahu anha. He says that on the day of Uhud, one of the people of Quraysh struck me. He was a very tall man. He struck me so severely that I fell to the ground. My left hand was wounded. But he didn't finish me off. He went away. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw the blood coming from my body and he said, cover up your wound, bind it. My mother was there. My mother had a waist wrapper, a cloth around her waist. She took it off and she bandaged my wound. She dressed up my wound. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was looking on. Then my mother said to me, get up and fight. Keep going. Now your hand is nursed. Now your hand has been dressed up. You have to go and fight. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, who could bear what you are putting up with, Ammara? You're seeing your own son being wounded and you're still going out to fight. Then the man who struck me walked past. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that is the man who struck you. So my mother and I, we struck him and he fell to the ground, and then all of us together, we killed him with our weapons. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, praise be to Allah who granted you victory over him, gave you the satisfaction of taking revenge on your enemy and let you see the vengeance for yourself. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was smiling very broadly till his back teeth could be seen. That is what is mentioned here. And then Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, on that day, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her son, your mother, see to her wounds, because she was herself bruised and wounded because she was trying to protect the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when he went to see his mother, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, look at your mother, may Allah bless your household, may Allah have mercy on your household. When Nusayba heard radiallahu anha, heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say this, she said, oh Rasulullah, pray to Allah that we accompany you in Jannah. Pray to Allah that we accompany you in Jannah. He said, oh Allah, make them my companions in Jannah. She said, after this, I don't care what happens to me in this world. After this, I don't care what happens to me in this world, as long as we can have your companionship in paradise, O Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as I mentioned, that she was also participant in some other battles. In the Battle of Hunayn, she also participated and she played a significant role there as well. She was in Hudaybiyah, Khaybar, and Hunayn. Now we move on to the martyrdom of Ziyad bin Sakan. Now, in today's lesson, we're going to speak about the martyrdom of a few companions, radiallahu anhu. And the purpose of this is to see the deep faith of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhu, and how prepared they were to sacrifice their life. And the reality is that as Muslims, we do not see their martyrdom or their death as a defeat. We are seeing their martyrdom as a victory, because the martyrs of Islam, we believe they are in Jannah. And this is going to be expressed clearly in the conversation that takes place at the end of the battle, when Abu Sufyan and Umar radiallahu anhu are going at it. Abu Sufyan is saying one thing and Umar radiallahu anhu is responding. So in that conversation, Umar radiallahu anhu says to him, your dead and our dead are not the same. Your dead are in the hellfire, whereas our dead, they are in Jannah. قَتْلَانَا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَقَتْلَاكُمْ فِي النَّارِ لا سواء. لا سواء, they are not the same. So this is an important point for us to remember, that while some of these stories are going to be saddening, they're going to be painful for us to hear, but as believers, we believe that they are in Jannah. So one companion that passed away, was martyred in this battle, was the companion Ziyad bin Sakan radiallahu anhu. In addition to being a martyr, Ziyad bin Sakan radiallahu anhu was brought closer to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, bring him closer to me. And when he was brought closer to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he lay on the floor, his cheek was on the foot of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he passed away in this condition, while his cheek was on the foot of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then in this battle, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself was inflicted with wounds. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam suffered some wounds himself in this battle. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, the famous companion, his brother Utbah was on the other side. He was with the Quraysh. He saw an opportunity to attack the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so he threw a large stone upon Rasulullah with such force that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost his lower tooth and his lower lip was injured. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu says, as much as I was eager to kill my own brother that day because of the pain he caused Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I wasn't eager to kill anybody else. Then there was another attack upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by two individuals. One was the name of Abdullah bin Qumaya. He was known as a wrestler amongst the Quraysh. He attacked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with such force that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's cheek got injured with the two links from his armor, because he was wearing armor, bodily armor, and his cheeks got caught in the two links. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was bleeding severely. Abdullah bin Shihab al-Zuhri, another individual. Now, Abdullah bin Shihab al-Zuhri later on became a Muslim. But in the Battle of Uhud, he also threw a stone at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, injuring Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's forehead. So this is something that happened here during this battle as well. Abdullah bin Qumaya, when he injured Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, here, take it, I am the son of Qumaya. He's being arrogant, he's boasting. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Aqma'ak Allah. May Allah disgrace you and uproot you. Barely a few days later, Allah caused the death of Abdullah bin Qumaya by a mountain goat. A mountain goat tore him to pieces with its own horns. Some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum displayed great heroics in the Battle of Uhud. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was donning a heavy armor made of steel, and at one point he fell into a hole that was dug by Abu Amir the Fasiq. Remember we mentioned Abu Amir, he was from the Aus tribe, but he joined the Quraysh. He was known as the Rahib because of his piety before, and then they called, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam named him the Fasiq, the transgressor. So he had dug a hole around the area. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam fell into that hole. And because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was wearing armor of steel, heavy steel, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was also exhausted, he had to be assisted by Ali radiallahu anhu and Talha radiallahu anhu to stand upright. And on this occasion, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam remarked, if you wish to see a living martyr, because Talha radiallahu anhu was martyred later on, many years later, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was given indication about Talha radiallahu anhu's future. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, if you want to see a living martyr on earth walking, then look at Talha radiallahu anhu. Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that my father Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said that when the two links of the armored helmet that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was wearing was stuck, his cheeks were stuck in them because of the injury, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu gripped them with his teeth and plucked them out. And Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anhu lost 2 teeth in the process. So he was ready to sacrifice his own teeth to take the links out of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's cheeks. When Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam attempted to climb one of the peaks of the mountain, he was fatigued. He was weak at that point. Remember, in the Battle of Uhud, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is 56 years old. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is 56 years old. His fatigue and weakness, compounded by the burden of wearing the armor, which was extremely heavy, made Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam a little bit tired. So Talha radiallahu anhu positioned himself so Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam can climb on his back upon the mountain. So Talha radiallahu anhu put himself on the ground and said, "Oh Rasulullah, climb on me." So this is the type of respect that they displayed for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Zubayr radiallahu anhu narrates, on one occasion I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam declaring, Talha has made Jannah compulsory upon himself. Talha will be a person of Jannah because of his sacrifices in the Battle of Uhud. Qais ibn Abi Hazim says, I saw the hand of Talha radiallahu anhu that he used as a shield in defense of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the day of Uhud. His hand was completely paralyzed. On that day, Talha radiallahu anhu sustained about 35 or 39 wounds. And whenever Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would speak about the Battle of Uhud later on, he would reminisce it and say, that was Talha's day. That day, Uhud was Talha's day, radiallahu anhu. Jabir radiallahu anhu narrates, while Talha radiallahu anhu was deflecting the attacks of the enemy, his fingers were severed. So, impulsively, as an impulse, he says, hiss. He made a sound, hiss. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you said Bismillah instead, the angels would have held you up to the heavens and people would have seen you. Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that my father Abu Bakr said that we noticed 70 wounds on Talha. So 35, 39, 70 is usually given as a number for excess. They might not necessarily be 70 per se, but many, many wounds were on Talha radiallahu anhu. Another person that was known for his heroics was Abu Talha radiallahu anhu. Now, not Talha, but Abu Talha. Who is Abu Talha? Abu Talha radiallahu anhu is the stepfather of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. Anas bin Malik, the famous companion. His stepfather Abu Talha was protecting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a shield. And he himself was a master archer. He was good at the bow and arrow. On that day, he broke 2 or 3 bows of his own. Whoever passed by, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them, if you have any arrows in your quiver, give them to Abu Talha, let him fire the arrows. Whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam planned to stick his head out to see the condition of the battle, Abu Talha would say to him, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, put your head back in. I would rather take wounds to my chest than for an arrow to hurt you. So this is again the Sahaba radiallahu anhum shielding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with their own bodies. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu was also a professional archer. On the day of Uhud, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took out all of his arrows from his quiver and placed them before Sa'ad and said, go on, shoot the arrows. May my parents be sacrificed for you. Imam Hakim narrates that on the day of Uhud, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu discharged around 1,000 arrows. Then there was the sacrifice of Abu Dujana radiallahu anhu. Remember last week we mentioned, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, who is going to take this sword and fulfill the rights of this sword? That was Abu Dujana radiallahu anhu, who wore the red turban. He stood before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a shield with his back facing the enemy. Many arrows landed on his back. But for fear of an arrow wounding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't budge an inch. Now, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was hurt in the battle of Uhud, he lamented the condition of the disbelievers. Anas radiallahu anhu says, on the day of Uhud, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would continue wiping the blood of off his blessed face, and he would lament in the following words. He would say, how can the people who stain the face of their Prophet with blood ever be successful, while the Prophet was merely inviting them towards their Lord? So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was lamenting their condition. How can these people who have caused me to bleed, their Prophet, who is merely calling them towards their Lord, how can these people ever be successful? Then Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cursed some of the leaders of the Quraysh. He cursed namely Safwan bin Umayyah, Suhail bin Amr, and Harith bin Hisham. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam cursed them. But then Allah Azza wa Jal revealed the verse of Surah Al Imran. لَيْسَ لَكَ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٌ أَوْ يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ أَوْ يُعَذِّبَهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ ظَالِمُونَ. The decision is not for you to take, O Rasulullah. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them, or maybe Allah punishes them for their wrongdoings. But this is not your decision. Basically, Allah Azza wa Jal was telling Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam not to curse them. Hafidh ibn Hajar Asqalani rahmatullahi alayhi says, all three of these individuals embraced Islam at the conquest of Makkah, Fatah Makkah. Fatah Makkah, at that time, in the 8th year, all of them embraced Islam. And perhaps this is why Allah Azza wa Jal revealed that verse to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, prohibiting him or forbidding him from cursing these three leaders of the Quraysh. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu says, I can still distinctly visualize the scene where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was busy wiping the blood from his face and saying, Oh Allah, forgive my people because they do not know. And this is the compassion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Firstly, he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for their forgiveness. And then he's saying, Oh Allah, they're naive, they don't know any better. He's not even calling them ignorant. He's saying, Oh Allah, they do not know. Even though ignorance is no excuse, especially after they witness the proof of the truthfulness of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was an embodiment of compassion and peace, apologized in front of Allah for them. Oh Allah, forgive them. Perhaps Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam thought that Allah will rescue them from shirk and bring them into the ambit of Islam. Perhaps Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam thought that Allah Azza wa Jalla will allow them to drink from the glass of ikhlas, and they will be intoxicated by the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would show them the decadence of this world and the reverence for the hereafter. Perhaps he is asking Allah to forgive them, so Allah sets them free from the poison of kufr and transgression and disbelief, and releases them forever into the sheltered splendor of Iman, Ikhlas and Jannah. Allah knows best. Then there was a companion by the name of Qatada bin Nu'man. He lost an eye in the battle of Uhud. He says, on the day of Uhud, I stood in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's face and directed my face towards the enemy, so that my face may bear the brunt of the arrows, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not be wounded. One of the last arrows of the enemy struck my face, and my eye came out of its socket. I held it and I looked at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made dua to Allah. Oh Allah, just as Qatada protected the face of your Nabi, protect his face and restore his eye to a better condition. And miraculously, because we believe in the mu'jizat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam put his eye back in, and Allah restored his eyesight better than before, he says. Sahabi radiallahu anhu. And one version of the narration says that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you have two choices. Either you keep your eye in this condition and you have something better in the hereafter, or I can replace it, or I can put it back in the socket. And he said, Oh Rasulullah, I have a wife at home and I don't want her to feel a revulsion towards me. Therefore, make dua to Allah and restore the eye. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam put the eye back in the socket. So Allah, make him more handsome than before. And this is the result of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's dua. Now, one question that always arises is, some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum fled, or they were in upheaval, they were in a state of anguish in the battle of Uhud. Why did that anguish occur? Because they had deeply rooted faith. So why did they become anxious in the Battle of Uhud? It was because they could not see whether Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is alive or not. Remember, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were complete in their loyalty and their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were complete in their adoration for Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when there was an upheaval and they were being ambushed, their hearts were trembling because they could not see if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is alive or not. So when the rumor had spread that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has died, it gave them a lot of grief. Anas radiallahu anhu's uncle, by the name of Anas bin Nadr, when he saw this condition, people fleeing from the battlefield, he said, "Why are you fleeing from the battlefield? Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he has died, but Allah is still alive. Come back and fight for the reason that you came to fight for in the first place. What would you do alive if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was dead? Come back and fight." Saying this, he himself went into the ranks of the enemy and fought until he was martyred. In the hadith of Al-Bukhari, Anas radiallahu anhu narrates, my uncle Anas bin Nadr was distressed for not joining Badr. And he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I am sad that I could not join Badr, but if Allah gives me the opportunity to join any future jihad, Allah will see my heroics. Allah will see the spirit of sacrifice. So when the Battle of Uhud was occurring and some Muslims had fled in defeat, my uncle Anas bin Nadr, he submitted before Allah, "Oh Allah, I beg your forgiveness for what some of the believers have done, fleeing from the battlefield. And I isolate myself from what the mushrikeen and the polytheists have done." Saying this, he advances towards the battlefield. And he sees Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu before him, and he says, "Where to, O Sa'ad? I can smell the fragrance of Jannah from Uhud." Subhanallah. I can smell the fragrance of Jannah coming from Uhud. And he went into the battle and he was martyred. Anas bin Nadr radiallahu anhu. Hafidh ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi rahmatullahi alayhi says, occasionally Allah Azza wa Jal allows some of his believers to smell and perceive the fragrance of Jannah in this worldly life, just as they smell rose and jasmine. For the scent of Jannah can be smelt from 500 years. That's the power of the scent of Jannah mentioned in the hadith. So sometimes in this worldly life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows some of his believers to smell that. So it wouldn't be strange if Anas bin Nadr radiallahu anhu actually smelt the fragrance of paradise. And it wasn't just figuratively. It was actually the smell of paradise. Many, many wounds were counted on his body after he was martyred. And it was in his regard that Allah Azza wa Jal revealed verse 23 of Surah Al-Ahzab. مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ. From the believers, there are some men who fulfill their oath and their commitment of Allah. What did he say to Rasulullah? "Oh Rasulullah, if Allah allows me to see a battle, Allah will see the spirit of my sacrifice. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ." Some of them have fulfilled their pledge. Some of them are still waiting. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. But they never changed their commitment to Allah. They never changed their commitment to Allah. Now, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was rumored to be killed, and some of the Sahaba were in panic, the first person to actually see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and notice him from his eyes was Ka'b bin Malik radiallahu anhu. Ka'b bin Malik says, "I recognized Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from his radiant eyes. The moment I caught sight of him, I yelled, 'Oh Muslim, glad tidings for you. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is over there.' Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam signaled me to stay silent. Although Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade me from doing so a second time, the hearts and minds of the Sahabas were already focused on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they came towards him, dashed towards him like moths to a flame. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam exchanged armors with Ka'b bin Malik radiallahu anhu, so he could be disguised, and he goes off to the mountain pass. As Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going off to the mountain pass, he was accompanied by Abu Bakr and Umar, Ali, Talha and Harith ibn Simma, and that is when Talha radiallahu anhu gave his back for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to climb higher up. Now, as we learned, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was injured in this battle and he was bleeding. Ali radiallahu anhu, and then later Fatima radiallahu anha, because some of the women came from Medina to see what happened. And they noticed blood from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so they tried to clean it up. Ali radiallahu anhu brought some water and cleaned the blood off his blessed face sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He also poured water over his head. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then performed wudu and led salah while seated. The Sahaba radiallahu anhu also performed their salah while seated behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's mentioned that the bleeding would not stop, so they burnt some grass and they applied it to the wound, so the bleeding of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would stop. Now, in this battle, not only did the believers lose a lot of the warriors, not only did many of them become martyrs, Allah forbid, but some of their bodies were badly mutilated by the Quraysh. Some of their noses and ears were severed, and some of their bellies were ripped open. And it's mentioned that even the women folk of the Quraysh joined in. Hind, who was the wife of Abu Sufyan, because her father was killed by Hamza radiallahu anhu in the Battle of Badr, she had given Wahshi the instruction that if you kill Hamza, I will give you all of my jewelry. When Hamza radiallahu anhu's body lay dead, she went and she tore his belly open and she took out his liver and she attempted to bite it and then she spat it out. And she was elated by this. She gave her jewelry to Wahshi. Now, Abu Sufyan, the battle has ended and the believers are retreating in one area. Abu Sufyan decides at this time, who was the leader of the Quraysh, to boast about their victory. So he climbs up on a hill and he says, "Is Muhammad still alive?" Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the Sahaba, "Don't answer him." Then he said, "Is Ibn Abi Quhafa alive?" Meaning Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, because his name is Uthman ibn Abi Quhafa. Don't answer him. Is the son of Khattab, Umar radiallahu anhu, is he alive? Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't respond to him. Then he said, these have been killed. If they were alive, they would have answered. At this point, Umar radiallahu anhu was not able to contain himself. So he said, "O enemy of Allah, you have told a lie. Allah has kept alive those people who are causing you pain." Abu Sufyan then says, "May Hubal be high." Hubal was the name of an idol. U'lu Hubal. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam now says, give him an answer. And up until this point, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't answer him. But when he was elevating the name of the idol, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him to elevate Tawheed. Tell him, Allah, when he said U'lu Hubal, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, tell him, Allahu a'la wa ajal. Allah is higher than him and Allah is more mighty. Then Abu Sufyan said, Lana al-Uzza wa la Uzza lakum. We have Uzza, you have no Uzza. Uzza was the name of the idol, but Uzza also means honor. We have honor today, you have no honor. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, give him an answer. They said, what should we say to him, O Rasulullah? Tell him, Allahu mawlana wa la mawla lakum. Allah is our protector, you have no protector. Abu Sufyan then said, Yawmun bi yawmi Badr. Today is in revenge for Badr. Wal harbu sijal. And war is in turns. You won yesterday, we win today. And then he said to them, you will find mutilation. I did not instruct it or command it, but I don't care for it either. These were the words of Abu Sufyan. In one version, Umar radiallahu anhu said, it's not the same. قَتْلَانَا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَقَتْلَاكُمْ فِي النَّارِ. Our martyred are in Jannah, while your killed are in Jahannam. Now, what we see in this exchange between Abu Sufyan and Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu is a clear sign that even the disbelievers understood the rank of Rasulullah, of course, but then Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu alongside him. They were more concerned about these three than anybody else from the believers. not responding to Abu Sufyan initially was to humiliate him until he becomes proud and boastful, assuming that he has killed the Prophet and killed Abu Bakr and killed Umar. May Allah be pleased with all of them. Then answer him. So he feels ashamed. So this is what Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi says in Zadul Ma'ad. He says that Rasulullah commanded them to respond to Abu Sufyan when he boasted about his idols and polytheism. Up until that point, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, don't answer him. When it was about him, is Muhammad alive? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Is Ibn Abi Quhafa, Abu Bakr alive? Is Umar alive? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, don't answer. It was only when he said, U'lu Hubal, may the idol Hubal be high. He said, answer him, tell him, Allahu A'la wa Ajal, Allah is higher. He did not command them to respond when he said, is Abu Bakr, all of those were alive. So in this way of responding, Umar radiallahu anhu is telling Abu Sufyan that the people that cause you the most pain, they are still alive. And we will never be cowards, and we will always have courage, and we will always stand up against you. Now the battle ends. We mentioned that some of the women came to nurse the wounds. Then there were a few individuals whose stories I want to share very quickly, inshallah, and then we will call it a day. One of them is Sa'ad ibn Rabi'. Now, who is Sa'ad bin Rabi'? Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu anhu was one of the wealthiest from the Ansar. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Medina Munawwara, he established brotherhood between some of the Muhajirin, some of the migrants, and some of the Ansar, the helpers. Who did he establish brotherhood between? Sa'ad ibn Rabi'. The wealthiest from the Muhajirin. Who was he? Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu anhu. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam established mu'akhat, brotherhood between Abdurrahman bin Auf and Sa'ad ibn Rabi' radiallahu anhu. He was also a very noble companion, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a lot of respect for him. When the battle of Uhud had ended, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu to go and look for Sa'ad ibn Rabi'. And he said, if you find him, pass him on my salam. Say to him that Rasulullah says salam to you, and ask him, what condition do you find yourself in right now? Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu says, I went out searching for him and found him while he still had some life left in him. He had sustained many, many wounds to his body. When I gave him the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, say to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, salam from me, and then inform him that I'm able to smell the fragrance of Jannah, and inform my people Ansar that as long as even one of you is alive, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is inconvenienced in any way, none of your excuses will be accepted in front of Allah. Make sure you defend Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at all costs. Saying this, he breathed his last, and he bade farewell to this world. Sa'ad ibn in one version of the hadith, it's mentioned that Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu anhu said, inform Rasulullah that this time I am about to pass on, and then convey to him this dua. May Allah reward you with the best of rewards on our behalf and on behalf of the entire ummah. Ubay bin Ka'b radiallahu anhu says, I returned to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with these words, because he was around too. I brought these words to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, may Allah shower his mercy upon him. In life and in death, he was loyal, and he always wished well for Allah and his messenger. Then the search for Hamza radiallahu anhu's body. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out in search for his uncle Hamza radiallahu anhu. He found Hamza radiallahu anhu's body badly mutilated, as we mentioned earlier. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was moved to tears. And then he commented, Ya Allah, shower him with your mercy. As far as I am aware, you, Hamza, were exceedingly charitable, and you maintained favorable family ties. Remember, Hamza radiallahu anhu was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's uncle. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at this stage, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam then vowed, by Allah, I swear, if Allah grants me victory over the disbelievers, I will mutilate 70 of them in retaliation. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam vowed revenge. But then Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed the verse from Surah Al-Nahl. وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ. If you take revenge and you retaliate, then retaliate in a manner corresponding to the adversity you were afflicted with. وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. But if you are patient, then patience is better for the believers. That is better for the patient ones. وَاصْبِرْ وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. Be patient, and your patience is with none but Allah. وَلَا تَحْزَنْ عَلَيْهِمْ. And don't be sad over the martyrs. وَلَا تَكُ فِي ضَيْقٍ مِمَّا يَمْكُرُونَ. And do not be in pain regarding the plots of the disbelievers. إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ مُحْسِنُونَ. Indeed, Allah is with those who have fear of Allah and with those who are righteous in their deeds. When these verses of the Quran were revealed, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam broke his vow, his oath, and he offered compensation for it. Jabir radiallahu anhu narrates that when Rasulullah glimpsed at the body of Hamza, he burst out crying. And in a hiccuping voice, he said, on the day of judgment, Hamza radiallahu anhu would be the leader of all the martyrs in the sight of Allah. It is narrated in the hadith of Mu'jam al-Tabarani on the authority of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib is Sayyidu Shuhada. He's the leader of the martyrs. And that is why his title is Sayyidu Shuhada, the leader of the martyrs. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then there was the martyrdom of Abdullah bin Haram. Who is Abdullah bin Haram? Remember last week we mentioned he was the father of Jabir radiallahu anhu, and he was mistakenly killed by some of the believers in the upheaval. Jabir radiallahu anhu narrates, my father was martyred in the battle of Uhud, and the disbelievers subjected his body to dreadful mutilation. When his body was placed before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I wanted to take a glimpse, but the Sahaba stopped me from looking at him because of the pain it would cause me. But Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed me to see him. When my aunt saw my father's condition, my aunt, her name was Fatima bint Amr, she burst out weeping. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to her, why do you weep? The angels are constantly casting shade over him. Allah has provided shade for him. This continued until his janazah and his corpse was lifted. Jabir radiallahu anhu says, once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam caught sight of me, he asked in concern, oh Jabir, what is the matter? Why do you look sad? He said, I noticed some sadness and depression on you. He said, oh Rasulullah, my father died and he left behind pets and young children. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, should I not convey to you a glad tiding? He said, surely, O Rasulullah. He said, Allah does not converse with anybody except through the veil. But Allah conversed directly with your father. Allah resuscitated his body and asked him, what do you want? He said, oh Allah, bring me back to life and allow me to go in the battlefield again. Subhanallah. That's what happened in the conversation. Allah said, that's not possible. Once a person has been decreed to die, they don't come back to life. But look at the zeal of the companions, radiallahu anhu. And what's a more beautiful thing? This same companion, Abdullah bin Haram, few days ago, before the Battle of Uhud, he sees a dream in which Mubashir bin Mundhir, one of the companions that was martyred in Badr, he witnesses him in the dream. And he says to him, where are you, Mubashir? He says, I'm walking in Jannah and you're going to join us soon. When he told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam this dream, he said, oh father of Jabir, the interpretation of this dream is that you will become a martyr. And then the final one, the martyrdom of Amr bin Jamuh. Amr bin Jamuh radiallahu anhu was a limp companion. And he had a severe limp. He was not just briefly limp, so he didn't just have a brief disability, he had a very severe limp. And he was actually the brother-in-law of Abdullah bin Haram, the one who we just spoke about. So Amr bin Jamuh, when it was time for Battle of Uhud, he wanted to go. His son said, you can't go. All of his sons participated in the battle. They said, you can't go, you have an excuse. And then he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, oh Rasulullah, I want to go to the Battle of Uhud, but my sons are stopping me. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you have an excuse. But then he turned to the sons and said, if you don't prevent him from going, maybe your father will become a martyr. Maybe he will taste martyrdom. He became really restless, Amr bin Jamuh radiallahu anhu. And then he made a dua to Allah when he was setting out. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave him permission to join, he made a dua, oh Allah, bless me with martyrdom and do not send me back to my family. In the same battle, his son Khalad bin Amr was also martyred. So his wife, who is the brother of Abdullah bin Haram, is the sister of Abdullah bin Haram, she lifts his body, because Amr bin Jamuh was martyred in the Battle of Uhud, and her brother's body and her son's body, all of them, on one camel and tries to bring them back to Medina. But the camel would not move. Whenever the camel was turned towards Uhud, it would continue going back to Uhud. But whenever it's turned towards Medina, the camel would not move. Then they came to Rasulullah and said to Rasulullah, this is the situation. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, did he make any dua before he died? He said, yes, he made dua, oh Allah, do not return me to my family. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, that is why the camel is not returning to Medina. Take him back to Uhud, and he was buried there in Uhud with Abdullah bin Haram, the father of Jabir radiallahu anhu. So this is subhanallah. These are the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, I swear by the being in whose absolute control lies life. Verily there are some amongst you who, if they take an oath against Allah, He would ensure that the oath is fulfilled. Like Jabir radiallahu anhu, so this man, this companion Amr bin Jamur says, oh Allah, if you give me this opportunity to join the battle of Uhud, bless me with martyrdom. Don't return me to my family. And this is exactly what Allah Azza wa Jal did for him. To the point that even the camel refused to go back to Medina. This is the condition of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. We're going to end here, inshallah. Next week, we're going to learn about the lessons from Uhud. And we'll probably speak briefly about the martyrdom of Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu anhu. Because Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu anhu was also martyred in that battle, then the lessons of Uhud. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.